Reconvene now and take up file item number 10. Our staff lead on this panel is Amanda Bohl, discussing data to decision-making, the Open and Transparent Water Data Act. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Fiorini. This panel kicks off our Data to Decision-Making Summer Series. So I'm very excited to be starting this. And this series is designed to continue the discussions that we began at the January Council meeting, where the Council was provided an overview of the Interagency Ecological Program, as well as the discussions at the April Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting around science governance. The purpose of the series is to help not just the Council and Council staff, but other agencies and stakeholders to better understand how we go from data to decisions, and in essence, how we structure science governance in the Delta. From May to October, so we're extending a little bit past summer, each Council meeting will highlight a different aspect of the Delta Science Enterprise, each a key component of science governance and decision-making. So future topics in this series will include performance measures, the Delta Science Program and the Delta Science Plan, collaborative science, the Collaborative Science Adaptive Management Program, governance case studies, and the social sciences in the science governance enterprise. So this month, we're starting at the beginning with data. This session will provide an overview of AB 1755, the Open and Transparent Water Data Act, and discuss ways in which data is important to the successful implementation of the Delta Plan. So with that, I will turn this over to George Isaac, Senior Environmental Scientist with the Delta Science Program, who will provide a greater context for AB 1755 and introduce our panel.
Good afternoon, Chair Fiorini and the council members. I'm really excited to be here and bring the panel here over to talk about the bill that was signed last November, actually in 2016 of November. This being the first of the series, I think it's appropriate to introduce and update the progress made on the Assembly Bill 1755, the Open and Transparent Water Data, signed by the Governor in November 2016. The Delta Science Program organized a data summit in 2014 and brought scientists, resource managers, decision makers, academia, stakeholders, and interested citizens together to discuss a new era in information management, knowledge discovery, and application of this knowledge to complex environmental policy and management decisions. The summit was followed up by a production and publication of a white paper titled Enhancing the Vision for Managing California's Environmental Information. This white paper later became instrumental in the development of the bill AB 1755, the Water Data Act. The bill called for developing a system for water and ecosystem data generated in the Delta region that will be accessible, transparent, and interoperable in a standard format for agencies, managers, stakeholders, and citizens. So why is this important? Increased access to data will support better informed decisions and cost-effective investments. And second, equally important, the implementation of the Delta Plan is dependent on data that is easily accessible from various sources and is crucial in addressing adaptive management and the co-equal goals. So today we have representatives from the three main agencies mentioned in the bill to give us an update on its progress. We'll start with Christina McCready from the Department of Water Resources, where she serves as Chief of the Integrated Data and Analysis Branch. She has organized several workshops and assembled teams of experts and agency staff, and has put in a great effort to move forward with the deliverables in this bill. After that, we'll have Greg Gerhardt and Tom Lupo. Greg is he's a deputy director from the State Water Board, who is also very much part of this effort in contributing and supporting DWR's efforts. Greg has been championing this concept in his own agency by organizing data sharing platforms for the State Water Board. And Tom, with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, his agency collects some of the largest sets of data in the state of California and understands the challenges of managing all this data. And before finally I turn over to Chris, I want to also mention that we are joined here with some of the members of a partner agency team that Chris has put together. And And during the discussions of questions that the council has, I'm sure they can also participate. So over to Chris McCready.
So I'm Chris McCready with the Department of Water Resources, and it's a pleasure to be here today, seeing some familiar faces and some folks I don't know yet, but I will do my very best to set the groundwork and then allow my partners to the right and also the folks that we brought with us from the partner agency team to fill in to help advance the discussion. To begin, I wonder if we can get the graphic up on. There we are. Okay.
We got it.
Yeah.
Have it.
Since you put it that way. Okay, so I know, I'll think bigger next time. So we have this graphic that I'll use just to structure my remarks, and really, as I mentioned, I just want to set the foundation for a better discussion as we go along. As George mentioned, the Assembly Bill 1755 by Assembly member then, Laird, passed in 2016, and since then, we've been working very hard to make progress toward the requirements of the bill and also to embrace the spirit of the bill and reach beyond that. And so to recap really what's required out of the act, we had some deadlines that came up very quickly. January 2018, we were to produce a strategic plan and also protocols. The strategic plan was aimed in the legislation at managing data for transparency and openness. The protocols were aimed at allowing data to be shared more meaningfully. We have embraced that, and as I say, have tried to reach past that. So then the next deadlines that we faced, well, we were given an option, I guess, by April 1st of 2018, if there was a need for a request for proposal for the development or the building of a platform. And because we are leveraging, and I'll go into our strategy in a moment, but because we're leveraging existing tools, we did not see a need to bring on consultants in that way. The final two deadlines are September 2019 and August of 2020. At that time, we are supposed to have made available certain data sets that are described in the legislation as they are available and ready to share. And those are to be updated quarterly thereafter. So to begin, looking at the graphic there that you see, if you look at all the 6 puzzle pieces on the left, you'll notice that 2 of the 6 are blue. Those are the requirements that were placed on the state agencies. So the strategic plan, as I mentioned, January 2018, and as we have begun working with our partners, again, assembled here next to me and behind me, I am extremely pleased to say that we have gotten into a very productive and fruitful relationship with our partners at the state agencies. And we, as I'm fond of saying, don't agree on everything, but I'm also happy to say that we work until we get to agreement. So the collaboration that was required, the coordination that was required by the legislation is probably at this point, I would like to say, has been exceeded. Our strategic plan articulates a number of goals and in the context of data availability and data management, and I'll just recap them briefly for you right now. And we have articulated a vision that really aims at, I'm sure, something that is near and dear to all of you, useful data for sound, sustainable water resource management. It's a simply stated vision, not necessarily simply attained, but we, in that spirit then, have articulated a need for data to be sufficient, to support water resources management and answer water resource-related questions, that data are accessible, so available for use and discoverable, and I'll say more about that shortly. That data are useful, so by that we mean that they're available in a form that facilitates use in different models, visualizations, and reports. And finally, that they are used. For heaven's sake, if we have all this data and we don't use it, we might as well not have it. So depending who you talk to, we are in different states of readiness with data. Some folks might not know where to look for any data. Other people have favorite data sources, and other people still probably think that we aren't collecting enough or collecting in the right way. So there are many perspectives on this issue, and we are hoping to embrace and advance them all in sort of a transect mode. So that said, we have some guiding principles that are articulated in our strategic plan, and we go on and express some ideas for implementation and so on. So anyway, I will leave that for now. Moving to protocols, we have this obligation, again, January of 2018, to put out protocols. From our perspective, all the agencies, I think it's fair to speak on behalf of all of us, the protocols are going to be a living document. We expect that they will need to be tested and exercised and updated over time. And so at this point, in January of 2018, we put out some very, very basic low threshold protocols that we hope all folks who want to make data available or are obligated to make data available will be able to reach as a threshold. As we move on, we may offer some more advanced protocols or more rigorous protocols. We probably will also, recognizing that change comes over much time if it's going to be successful, we expect to emphasize more of a best practice approach so that we can allow people to mature with us. So the protocols will be a living document, and we can talk more about how they'll be matured if the group would like to talk about that. And then as I move over to the left-hand side of the graphic, you'll see the user demands or use cases. And I don't know how closely all of you have followed it. I know some of you were involved in our conversations about use cases. We have been fortunate not just to have a great partnership with one another, but to have the enthusiasm and excitement and contributions from other partners outside of the state agencies who there are a lot of folks who are excited about the value data brings and the role it could play, and perhaps and usually probably does already play, but untapped potential. And so 1755 has really given us all something to unify behind. And so we've had a lot of, and we've been so fortunate to have a lot of enthusiasm coming from other quarters. And so UC Water and the CLE, it's the Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, UC Berkeley. A number of folks have come together to produce this document I'm holding up, and no need to change the cameras. It's data for water decision making. It's available on our AB 1755 program website, which is accessible through the DWR website. I would encourage you to browse that. It's, I think, a beautiful report that very well articulates the role that use cases have in designing a system that allows the user to get what they need from it. So what we didn't want to do, although we could have, if we wanted to take a very literal approach with this 1755, we could have just had one website with a bunch of links on it. Here's where you can go to get this, and here's where you can go to get that. But what we really hope to do is to have the user in mind from the beginning. So what kinds of questions are we trying to answer? What kind of data and in what form is that data necessary to help answer that question? And who needs the information? So we're looking at it from that perspective, and by making the user the focal point, we hope that the system will be that much more usable, which goes toward our goals and our ultimate vision of useful data for sound, sustainable water resource management. We might briefly, I'll just say briefly that the use case, one way to describe it is it's sort of a short examination of who needs what data in what form for what decision. And I have expressed at the Delta Science Plan conversation, I will express it again today, that I like to think of the use case as sort of a common meeting space between those folks who are extremely knowledgeable and very close to the decisions about water management, and a meeting place with those folks who are maybe more technically minded, either data collectors or IT professionals. And so all of these folks are experts in their own fields, but the use case provides sort of a common meeting ground for that conversation to be meaningful. So with that, I'll move on to the OWIA recommendations. And I know I'm getting along, so I'm taking Tom's time now. But the OWIA stands for Open Water Information Architecture. And again, we had a lot of enthusiasm and excitement from CCST, California Council on Science and Technology, and also a specific individual from UC San Diego who works with the Supercomputer Center in Scripps. And so we have this draft Open Water Information Architecture document that came out as part of our, it was attached to our protocols document that came out in January. And it's very brief, extremely dense, and it's essentially the beginning of a pathway toward this strategy of federation. So you're good with me taking your time, right? I'm still taking yours. Okay. And it's you. So, I want to mention this concept of federation, and it sounds very, it's sort of simply put, and it's not a complex understanding needed, but I do want to just sort of relate it in a manner that means something to most of us. So if you were interested in a particular topic, or you were interested in a particular author, you might walk into your local library branch, and you might look in the card catalog for either that information or that author, or you can look up on a number of different search terms, and ultimately, you would be able to discover the existence of other materials. They might not all be in the site that you're in, they might not all be on the shelf in the building you're in, but you would be able to become aware of their existence and be able perhaps to access them through the interlibrary loan system and so on. So in that same way, what we hope to do and what we aim to do is to emphasize federation as opposed to co-location. We're not trying to make one big castle of data that everybody can pull from. Instead, what we'd like to do is have existing portals and platforms work together so that a user might enter one and be able to discover what's available on another. And that, in addition to saving us a lot of building time and building money, also allows people to join voluntarily. So if a person who operates a portal or platform outside of the state agencies that are implicated in AB 1755, they might choose to honor the protocols and observe some of the best practices that we've put forward, and in so doing, make their data available and accessible and discoverable. So it's a really tangible way to explain something that sounds very grand, and I think has incredible potential to help us all discover and use more data in a more meaningful way. But that's the strategy we're taking. So OWIA describes some of that, lays out some of the functional requirements, sort of the what's expected of the system, what is a user expecting it to do, and then from there it goes into technical requirements, and that's about the step we're at there. Along the bottom of the graphic, which I'll leave it to you if you want to show it again. The puzzle piece at the bottom of the graphic is data challenges and test bed. And of course, data is challenging, but that's not what we mean there. What we mean by data challenges, and I will leave it to others to say more. I know, Greg, this is your area, so I'll leave it to you to say more about the present challenge. But data challenges are exciting opportunities for people who have the chops, who want to get into the system and play with it and figure out what problems they can solve or what visualizations they can create for people who make the decisions but maybe aren't as technically minded. And I'm sure that's a terrible explanation, but I think it'll get you going down the path. The data challenge really is an opportunity for people to address a specific problem or set of problems using data and showing some level of innovation that gets the state further, or the host further. The test bed concept is not unlike that, but would be a little bit more of a, I don't know how many of you have been in the sort of the vicinity of IT people, but they talk about a sandbox, and what I guess I would describe there is that it's sort of a place that we can bump our heads and make mistakes and not affect the system itself. So the idea behind a test bed is that we might similarly issue a charge to people who are excited and interested and innovative and ask them to test, perhaps taking a use case from beginning to end and figuring out where the problems are. And so that's another sort of roll up your sleeves opportunity, and those are down at the bottom because they're really much more on the ground. Up across the top, you'll see another puzzle piece. It's our final puzzle piece about exploration of governance and funding. And again, we've been fortunate to have a lot of energy and interest coming from other sectors. And so philanthropy helped to underwrite and manage a contract with Redstone Strategy Group. And if any of you are familiar with the Aspen Dialogue Series, and particularly their product that came out in 2017 called the Internet of Water, another beautiful document. Okay. I would encourage you to have a look at that. That's a national level version of this conversation where there's a look at how we make data more meaningful and how we allow it to play a bigger role in science and management of water resources. So anyway, these are the puzzle pieces that sort of constitute our AB 1755 implementation. We're working together to plan specific projects, and we ultimately will soon be testing the federation and interoperability of data on the existing portals. I will part with these two notes. There is a portal hosted by California Government Operations Agency, and that's www.data.ca.gov, and there's quite a lot of data already up there, including many data sets that the State Water Resources Control Board has been working hard to put up to make their data open and transparent. And then there is more recently a California Natural Resources Agency hosted portal that is www.data.cnra.ca.gov. So if you insert CNRA after the first term, you'll find the same, another repository of data that is hosted by CNRA and has CNRA-related data sets. And in particular, you'll find a lot of fisheries and ecological data from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So encourage you to get in there and start playing with it. It doesn't hurt. You can't hurt anything. And then as we go along, as the summer progresses, you'll hear more about data challenges, test beds, and soon how we'll move forward with governance and funding to make this work out in the long term. I'm done. Thank you. You have no time left. Okay.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Greg Gerhardt and members of the council. My name is Greg Gerhardt, Deputy Director of State Water Board in charge of Office of Information Management and Analysis. It's a big mouthful. I like to call the title shorthand the Chief Data Liberator for the Water Board, because I'm often at odds with people that want to hold on to their data and keep it sort of in a protected mode, and whether it's internal or external parties. So that's one of the challenges of why open data. It really is something that transcends the statute. It goes back to prior administrations in the federal government, European Union, mid-2010 sort of era. There was a lot of effort to make government more open using techniques that were available in the retail consumer side of the data world that allows us to sort of order a car when we need a ride somewhere. All these sorts of machine-readable transactions occur in that space, so the vision was to make government also accessible in the same manner. So really what this is sort of a movement towards that accessibility. And the Water Board steps into this quite easily in some ways because we have an organization that's based on public involvement. We have 9 regional boards, the 10th state board. We have a lot of public process. We're used to producing our information, showing our work on products. So a lot of that culture shift came relatively easy. What's not easy is some of the technology and the infrastructure work to get this data to show up at that sort of accessible layer. So we've been focusing at the Water Board a lot on, if you use the metaphor of the library, we're trying to build delivery trucks that provide useful information, data sets that show up at that sort of front door. So we're using the GovOps, the state of California's open data platform. We were using that prior to the statute, so it actually helps to have 2 systems in California government that are producing published open data sets because it can provide interoperable tests and federation tests within our own environment. So we've been trying to deliver more and more useful data to that platform, and the hard work of converting data sets and getting stakeholders within our organization comfortable with it is what's taking a lot of our time. So we have a number of useful data sets. If you look at the purpose of the statute, it probably focuses mostly at the Water Board on water markets and transparency on some of the conversation you had with the Water Master about how much water is being used, who's using it for what purposes, those kinds of questions. So we're focusing on those, prioritizing building infrastructure to deliver pipelines essentially of that kind of data to an open data publishing platform. And the hope and the benefit is the other sort of arm of what we're working on is involved in the civic engagement effort of encouraging people to use our data in ways that are providing new insights or maybe providing operational tools that don't exist today. So we've run a number of open data challenges, and one of them produced an insight about water conservation and the water energy savings associated with water conservation that sort of changed conversation and policy. And then the other one provided an interesting operational tool that may be of interest to you guys. It looked at when and how you might want to operate releases from reservoirs so that you would optimize your desire, whether it was improving habitat for juvenile salmon or what have you. So you could look at data that had groundwater elevation, are the fish in the traps, what is the release, what are the other pressures on the system, and you could provide a tool like that that helps operational decisions. So these are kind of the benefits that we see coming out of open data, and so we're doing a lot of work to build that infrastructure and then sort of generate interest on the external side to help activate the right data sets arriving at the library.
Afternoon, council members. As George said, my name is Tom Lupo. I'm the Deputy Director of Data and Technology for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And to borrow Greg's term, I'm more or less the Chief Data Wrangler, Data Liberator for my agency. When 1755 came along and required state agencies to develop open data distribution channels and platforms, our response was, yeah, of course. We've been in this business for a very long time. As a regulatory agency, the Department of Fish and Wildlife has always put a premium on transparency. You know, we need to make our data that drives decision-making open and available to all eyes who want to see it. And back as early as the 70s, we were charged with developing and aggregating databases regarding endangered species and significant natural areas and things like that. And we've always made that data open and available to anyone who wants it. In recent years, meaning since the turn of the century, the last century, we've had an open platform up called BIOS, B-I-O-S, and it's got pushing 2,500 different data layers in it. These are data that we've aggregated from others. Others have contributed to us, as well as pretty much everything that's produced within the department, and even data that we are the primary producers of within the Data and Technology Division. So that represents, I think it's probably fair to say, the single largest collection of data of any state agency in California, at least within the environmental realm. And we are more than happy to provide that data to the folks who are putting together the portal for the Delta and also anything else that falls under 1755. 1755 talks about water data, and to us, water means fish habitat. It's that fluid habitat that fish live in. So the focus of our work for this project is fish occurrence, distribution, and other ecosystem type data. For the Delta, one of the primary data sets that we've been producing is a vegetation mapping product. Vegetation mapping meaning think habitat. And with cooperation and support from the Department of Water Resources, we've mapped the Delta footprint, I think 3 or 4 times over now. So we've got a long time series to observe change in habitat of the vegetation and so on. The Delta, as you folks know, the Delta is probably one of the most heavily mapped, monitored pieces of territory on Earth. You know, so we've got a lot of data for the Delta. Thank you.
John?
Just to link up everything here, clearly there's lots of information that's out there that will be of use for the council as well as for the science program. Like that the veg mapping data could be useful for some of the performance measures that we're developing from the Delta Plan to look at for the ecosystem amendment, thinking about distributions of different kinds of habitats. There's lots of growing interest in the integrated modeling, and so thinking about how hydrological data could link to fish data, could link to habitat data. That some of that data might be used for calibrating models or for validating models. All of the emphasis, one of the key things I mentioned in the science plan update is a focus on synthesis. So clearly, that's the kind of data and information that will be used and integrated into some of the syntheses that there's interest in looking at. I think one of the challenges is integrating across these kinds of data sets. So, you know, being able to link up some of the habitat data or other kinds of data to hydrologic data, to water quality data. I think that's one thing that with AB 1755, moving towards an integrated or federated system should facilitate that sort of ability to look across multiple data sets and link across data sets. And I'm sure most of those data are linked in terms of time stamps that of when the data were collected and locations and things, so that's one way that might be possible to do some of the linking.
Questions? Ken?
Yeah, maybe just to follow up with John or the panelists. You know, we've had a lot of emphasis on the need for monitoring and all of the monitoring that's going on, the importance of monitoring. So in terms of what your three agencies are doing, is all of this monitoring data going into your databases and you know, and that's what's being used in some of these, or I guess theoretically used in some of these sophisticated models, or is this all moving us forward in adaptive management so that information's available for water operations, restoration activities? I mean, maybe somebody can kind of pull these threads together so we understand how it all sort of works, because we're monitoring, database, modeling, and at some point, there's practical application of all this. Where are we in that spectrum? Or
So one of the principles of open data is that you're trying to create a market for consuming the data, and the timeliness of the data is a key element of that. So there will be markets, obviously, people will consume data that's old and they want to do things with that. But once you start producing a data set, and for example, we participate in the Delta Regional Monitoring Program. They collect data. Some of that data goes into our database that's called California Environmental Data Exchange Network, CEDN. CEDN has pipelines that are built back out to that public interface in a machine-readable format, and we're actually trying to add some value to that data that as it flows out there so that people start using it from there, consuming it from that place. And one of the principles of open data and doing it that way is that you create a stronger feedback loop for producing and reducing lag time in the data lifecycle. So that as people start getting used to seeing, for example, mercury data, they don't want to wait a year for next year's mercury data. They may ask for data more timely, which may require a bunch of changes to that data lifecycle. But the idea is that if it's valuable, then we want to know why and how timely and which data sets are valuable. And this is a way to have that conversation using open data.
okay, so that sounds like an emphasis on real-time monitoring and
Just timely.
or timely,
yeah.
whatever.
Because
So
real
not-
time has its own meaning that's really complex, but yeah.
Yeah. More complex than that I think I should.
I'd like to chime in, not because I can improve Greg's response, but because I come from a less technical background. And so I am amazed on a personal level at the fact that we're all carrying around phones that can tell us where we catch what bus at what time and what time it'll get us to where we want to go, and is it running late, and if I took this bus instead of that car or walked. And so that level of the value that data gets turned into information that can inform our decisions on just a personal level is pretty remarkable. And I also wanted to mention that the inclusion of the April 1st, 2018 deadline in the legislation about RFPs generated a lot of commercial interest with the private sector and NGOs and folks who maybe, again, have this excitement about turning data into information and wondering how do they get involved and how do they make a difference. And so, again, rather than harnessing their power to build some giant repository of data, we hope that by making all of our data available and allowing others to join this federated network, we allow that kind of creative spirit to turn the raw data into more meaningful information that anyone can use, visualization tools and models and such. And it's our hope that everyone will have access to some of those. Some of those products will be available on the market where folks have to pay to use them, but probably any number of them will become available on a free-for-all basis. And I think all the state agencies have an interest in ensuring that everybody has equal access to at least some of the visualization tools. So there's various layers of how that information becomes accessible. But to go to your point, just collecting it is great. Collecting it and turning it into something that people can access is better, and turning it into something that people can use is our real goal. So agreed completely, and thanks.
Others?
I know George touched upon this at the beginning, but I really want to emphasize that we put together this data summit in June of 2014 that brought experts from around the state to tackle this issue that at the time Dr. Peter Goodwin was very interested in and had a lot of forethought about, which is big data. How do we manage big data, and how do we harness it in a way that will improve our decision-making for the Delta? And so as a direct result of that summit, we produced a white paper with proceedings from that summit, and the number one recommendation was we need federated systems, we need interoperable federated systems to improve decision-making. And that made its way into this legislation, and so now we're seeing the implementation of that, and I think it's pretty exciting.
So I wanted to share that I had the privilege of being part of a working group that was devoted to offering some suggestions on the governance and funding of the implementation of AB 1755. And what it revealed to me is the vast amounts of data that already exist in all these governmental agencies' databases, and the complexity of trying to get to the point where a decision maker, such as a policymaker, can understand what's available, understand how to use the interface, understand the currency, how current the data is, and understand if I ask a water management decision question, such as I have to produce this groundwater sustainability plan, I have to have a water budget, I need to know how much water there is available in my basin to replenish my aquifer. How does that possibly affect water quality if I move water at a certain time? All these factors that go into just producing this plan, or even operating a water system, you can't just go into CDEC and get the answer, and you can't just go into Fish and Wildlife's database and see how your water management actions will affect these fisheries. So I am very excited that this effort is moving forward so quickly. I have a question about what are folks expecting when? I mean, the use cases are a wonderful illustration of how one might use this federated system, but when you report to the legislature about implementation of AB 1755, what will you show them? It's the puzzle pieces are great, and I'm just trying to imagine will you show them something such as a visualization of a particular water management decision problem, or how do you demonstrate progress in implementing AB 1755?
Please, go ahead. Go ahead.
And wait. So we've puzzled with this also, and we will always continue to, it's going to be a moving target as to what success in this space looks like, because it is kind of a build the field and the players will come dream kind of an approach. But in the water boards, this is actually prior to the statute, we designed a data lifecycle system around the water conservation topic. So when the executive order came down and my board took on the challenge of trying to convince behavior changes in California around water conservation, they knew that data was going to be a large part of that. So there was an implicit effort to build a system that does this sort of timely arrival of data so that last month's data could be ready to talk about at the next month's board meeting. And then dashboards are being built off of that. And now that data is being published on the Open Data Platform. It's not under the order anymore, but we're still getting some data. So that system of collecting information or data and turning it into information for my board is an example of, I think, what we want to see happen with other kinds of use cases. And I think there are other examples out there, but that's one that comes to mind. So I'm hoping that over time, we'll be able to show more and more of these sort of connections to decisions that are being made, or operational decisions, or even management decisions within agencies about assigning resources to work on things. You know, open data is really meant to be that sort of depth of transformation. So that's what I think we should point to, is examples like that. And other people have heard this, but I've advocated that our group should set performance measures for ourselves of what it does mean to succeed in some of these areas. So, and we're working on that.
You touch on an interesting point there, that disconnect between data and knowledge, right? And we've been building databases and portals and whatnot for many years now. And so if the analogy is the library, we have a Library of Alexandria, but it's not going to do your term paper for you. You still have to go in there and review all that data, you know, sort through it, make sense of it, find out what its limitations are, and do your analysis on your own. To get to the point where there's some sort of a turnkey system or something where someone can ask a question, as you described, in plain English and get a plain English answer back out of it, that's a problem and a solution far beyond just availability of data. Right? So this is a good first step. If you don't have access to data, then there's nothing that good happens after that. But just having access to data does not necessarily inform real-world problems. Two things.
I think the usage of the data, let's think of another paradigm in another example. For example, what you just said, we have certain kind of software, we have applications, we know when the bus moves, we know what the air quality is at this area. Well, these came out of a very certain need that we need to have this information. And I'm sure that in the water world, we have these needs. It's just the researchers and whoever does this analysis and science, one day is going to say, I need to have this kind of correlation with this data because I need a piece of knowledge that everybody wants. So it's better to have it in this format. And I'm sure that the needs are being discovered faster than we think. So it's going to be very popular, I think, this data set, databases that we have. And I think it's a great thing. You know, I commend you for doing it.
That put a smile on George's face. I think that you have a comment.
No, I wanted to just address two of the points that's mentioned here. I think one of the biggest things that excites me about AB 1755 is the challenge that you mentioned about data sitting in different places and how to marry them together and how to understand. And you mentioned about monitoring data. What do you do with all these data? I think 1755 is a game changer in that aspect. It's going to bring these data together in a format that researchers can understand it better, can put it together. So knowledge discovery is going to be accelerated in this process. So that is the exciting part about 1755, because the technical requirements are going to make all of this data become a standard data so people can access it in one format and find out the meaning behind it.
John?
I had a question about, so we heard from Michael George about the use of all the remote sensing data for ET. Are our remote sensing data going to be incorporated into this platform, or is that part of the idea of the federated system? Because it seems like there's more and more remotely sensed data that could be used for veg mapping or for all kinds of other uses that would be of interest.
Yeah, so it's a great question, because that is showing up more and more. We have a couple of uses besides the ET one you heard about, but harmful algal blooms. We're trying to build some predictive tools that are using satellite imagery and stuff. So one of the key things about open data, though, is that the stewards that are most knowledgeable about the data should be the publishers and the stewards ongoing of that data set. And so with this remote sensing data, resources, that would point towards a federal agency. And one of the goals of this is to interoperate and federate with all of those people. But we would not want to have the burden of republishing and explaining someone else's data, but we certainly want to encourage. And the feds are actually way out ahead of the state in this. They've been doing open data for years now. So,
Anyone else? Well, George, thanks for pulling the panel together. Christina, Tom, Greg, thank you for spending time with us and explaining this, and best wishes for continued success.